What is right to work? Let's just define it. Right to work simply means that a union cannot get a worker fired for not paying them. That's it. Doesn't do anything else. Doesn't affect collective bargaining any other way. Unions, workers, they can still negotiate with employers and businesses for wages, hours, working conditions. Anything they could before a right to work, they can negotiate for after right to work, except for the union saying you have to pay us or we're going to get you fired. That's it. And notice I said pay and not join. Workers already have the ability to not join a union. It's called exercising their BEC, or in the public sector, their ABUD rights. But unfortunately, they still have to pay the vast majority of their dues in what's called agency fees. So right to work, you're seeing right to work states, they have higher population growth, they have higher wage growth. When you factor in cost of living, workers are making more. But that's all ancillary. All right to work does is say a union can't get a worker fired for not paying them. So thank you all for coming out, and I look forward to a lively debate.
Great. Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Coming to a conservative audience is always an interesting opportunity to talk about these kinds of issues. So I appreciate you giving me that chance. So I want to make three main points about right to work. First is that the sort of economic evidence behind them is really weak. That evidence that they do any good is very, very weak. I'll go into some of the details, but that's sort of point one. Point two is right to work is not exactly what it seems. It's a little more complicated than it was just described, and I'll explain that. So this second is a little more complicated. And third is I want to at least broaden your horizon about unions and what they do. I think they are much more of a benefit to society than sort of the typical sort of conservative caricature. And so I want to, because that's really what right to work ends up being about, is about unions. And so I want to let you to think that in a broader way about them and their role in society and the economy. The first on the economic evidence. You heard Vincent talk about some growth or wages or any of that. So basic studies, the thing to know when you're looking through the evidence here is a good study should control for all sorts of factors that also might influence these kinds of things. Studies that do that basically find very little, if any, evidence that it has any effects on employment or job growth or the overall per capita income. In contrast, the research is pretty strong that right to work does lower workers' wages. It's pretty good evidence on that, even when controlling for all sorts of factors. So the evidence is really not so strong, then on right to work not really being exactly what it seems. So I appreciate the distinction between having to join. You never have to join a union, which is true. What you do, though, have to pay, if a union negotiates a contract with a company, you do have to pay these agency fees. That's because the law is a union has to represent all workers. They can't just represent those who are members. They have to represent all workers in their contracts. So a contract has to apply. You can't just say you get good wages, you don't. They have to give everyone the same benefits. Then also, if you have an individual grievance, you want to talk to the employer, the union has to represent you, whether you're a member or not, the same level that they would otherwise. So without that ability, you basically have the ability to free ride and not pay for services you're getting. Very few organizations survive in that kind of a model. Our law says that when a majority of workers choose to join a union, that union is the sole representative negotiating authority with the employer, and then on account of that, they have to represent everyone, and they can require people to pay for that benefit. The other thing about the thing about unions being more positive than you think, so the final point, so I'll be the first to admit, unions are not perfect. Just like corporations are not perfect. They are, but both are necessary and vital parts of any modern society, any functioning modern society. The unions perform two basic roles. They give some workers some power in the economy to negotiate with their employer. They also give workers some power in democracy to have their voices heard. And I think the democratic point is really very important here. So you go back to James Madison's ideas about how democracy should work. You have interest groups that sort of duke it out. If you can't control all interest groups or factions, so you want many of them, and you want them to have some relatively equal power so that they can come to, in theory, a solution that's relatively good for everyone. Without them, you just have the employer side having lots of power in our democracy, or having more power, and workers having relatively little, and so you have one voice being heard a lot louder than others. Economic evidence is weak. Right to work is a little more complicated than it's made out to be, and unions as a whole are often quite positive force.
All right. Anybody want to pop in with rebuttals, or can I jump right in with questions?
I can talk about a couple of things,
Sure.
if that's all right. First of all, unions are positive, and they can be a positive. And right to work actually helps make unions stronger. When unions have to prove their worth to their membership and can't take those members' dues for granted, then they represent them better. And the statistical evidence backs that up. Last year was a little bit of an outlier. We saw a lot of union growth in New York State. But if you take the last 4 years, you're actually seeing the right to work states have stronger union membership growth than the non-right to work states. And it's a combination of several factors. First, it's economic. There's more jobs in the right to work states. Job growth in right to work states is greater than the non-right to work states, so there's more opportunity for union jobs. More opportunity for union jobs means more union members. Also, it means that they just can't take them for granted, and they have to show them that they're worth it. And by doing that, they serve their members' interests better because they have to earn their dues. As far as the economics goes, it is clear. Workers in right-to-work states, when you factor in cost of living, and that's one of those factors that you have to factor in because milk, rent, taxes in one state is different than milk, taxes, rent, gas in another state. When you factor all of that in, workers in right-to-work states are making about 4.1% more. And as far as the exclusive representation claim, that's the so-called free rider claim. I think free rider is a little derogatory. They're not free riders, as my good friend Terry Bowman, who's in the audience right now, current UAW member, he likes to say they're actually forced riders. Because whether or not the union, or the worker wants to represent themselves, they have no choice if the union chooses to represent all workers. And while some states may differ and may say that the union has to represent all workers, at least in the private sector, unions can have what's known as member-only agreements. And in fact, we're seeing this within the union movement with what we're seeing with worker centers right now. Even the AFL-CIO president, Richard Trumka, has come out and said that, hey, we just want to represent workers that want to be represented. Now, they do lose a lot of benefits, and David, I'd be the first if you want to join with me in saying that unions shouldn't represent workers that aren't paying them, and unions don't have to represent members that don't want to be represented, and we should give workers the ability to say, okay, I want to represent myself. So if the Center for American Progress wants to join Mackinac, we would love to work with you on ending the forced rider problem. And the last issue is democracy. Sorry, I'm going to use that outnumbered example really quick. Who wants David to buy the beer after this? Show of hands? Well, that's democracy. We're not a democracy in this country. First of all, we're a representative republic. And in that representative republic, it's constitutional, and there are constitutional limitations on what the majority can do. That's why we have liberty in this country, and if you ask me, when there's a conflict between liberty and democracy, we must always err on the side of liberty, because we can't have tyranny of the majority. We can't simply have 51% voting and saying, okay, the 49% has to give us money or has to pay for us.